Hi, my name's Dave, and I want to tell you what it's like to interview as a data scientist. I'm mostly self-taught. I started programming BASIC when I was just a wee lad back in the 80s on a Texas Instruments computer that hooked up to the television with a coaxial interface. Uh, but mainly my background before I was interested in machine learning was in database administration, full stack web development, performance, optimization, and scalable infrastructure management, sprinkled with just a little bit of management here and there. But I'm self-taught, but I did go to school for music performance, but ultimately I left the program just short of completion to start a business. And so far, I've been working for 15 years or so. Well, not to give you my life story, but I've been a developer for quite a while, and I think it's important to understand where I'm coming from. Initially, I got interested in machine learning at my last job, working with the research department, where I wrote a few prototypes dealing with multinomial Bayes, text mining, and started dabbling a little bit with matrix factorization techniques. But for the past 3 years, I've dove in head first and completed Andrew Ng's machine learning courseware from Stanford Extension via Coursera, supplemented with calc, stats, here and there from a variety of places like Khan Academy, textbooks my friends gave me, and then I took a survey class on data science at General Assembly, and that was really good. But since then, I've mainly accepted every project I can reasonably complete and just trying to get experience. But believe it or not, even me, as a self-taught college dropout without a master's or PhD, has been interviewing for data science roles. The most obvious impression I get from the dozen or so interviews I've been on is that, that this data science role is largely misunderstood. And if the surplus of content being written about how this new role in business is yet to really define itself isn't an indicator of this vague expectation around what data science is or it isn't, the hiring process certainly reflects that, in my opinion. I've mostly been interviewing for opportunities I've found on Craigslist or other job boards. And the companies range from startups to medium-sized companies of 1 to 200 people, and in San Francisco. Literally job recs that are titled data scientist. I've found, and a lot of colleagues of mine have found, that the hiring process for data science jobs isn't so much different than what you would expect as a software engineer, with the addition of a little theory and practical knowledge around data problems. Most cases, you'll expect some qualifying activity or programming task to be completed before a phone screen, or maybe not. Maybe it comes like the second or third chat you have with someone, but usually I found this to be true. They'll ask you to do something like produce a histogram of some kind, do a FizzBuzz exercise, anagram solver, or some really basic data structure question. Some phone screens I've had, I've been asked to describe basic objects and academic computer science concepts fresh out of textbooks, such as hash tables, linked lists, arrays, and describe some of these things in terms of big O notation. Some cases I didn't provide enough detail about what they were expecting and never got a call back. But usually if I got a phone screen, I got an interview. Most interviews that I've been in have started out with explaining a project that I've done and then deconstructing it from end to end. What the problem was, what the metrics for success are, assumptions, how I got the data, any pre-processing, the modeling, the classification that was used, the validation test, training split, or how do you validate the assumptions, everything, and especially how the model works in as much detail as possible. So Yeah, and being able to talk to the pre-processing, like if you're dealing with text, being able to explain like TF-IDF, how do you convert text to tokens, and at what level does a cross product occur, where does the likelihood function come, and how does it work in terms of naive Bayes, and then other concepts like gradient descent, hyperparameter selection, error terms, performance metrics, be it naive Bayes, linear regression, random forest, ensemble methods, support vector machines, any kind of deep learning. So yeah, and then to be able to understand, or at least explain, how you can use these things differently, and how they're different in terms of performance, and how do you measure them, and how do you deal with them as far as maybe from a discovery point of view, and then from an at scale and production point of view. Even though some of that touches a little bit on data engineering, but I still think it's useful, and it seems like a lot of companies are asking about that, and they're putting it in a lot of job requirements. So even if you don't aspire to be a big data engineer, I think it's important to understand what the tools are and where these things cross over, and how your role fits in with that whole equation. Because whether you like it or not, the work you're doing or will be doing should be put in a production system at some point. This might be a shocker, but in the vast majority of interviews I've been in with small to medium-sized companies here in the Bay Area, it's been heavy on software engineering questions, and especially on data structure puzzles. If if you're self-taught like me, you would be wise to familiarize yourself with these traditional academic computer science concepts that you probably just don't deal with on a day-to-day basis, or you just, if you've learned by doing projects your whole life, because that's how you've learned. You should expect to be measured by the standards of academically trained people. But for me, at least, having tons of experience in a variety of projects doesn't automatically imbue me with this level of knowledge to solve these data structures questions and puzzles. But thankfully, we live in an age where there's plenty of resources available. You got HackerRank, there's Codility, CodeChef. There's tons of good things. I'll put some links in the bottom in the description here. But it's really not that bad. You might look at it at first and kind of scoff and be like, oh, this is ridiculous. Prefix sum, or a binary tree, or binary search. These things are not that bad. If you've been programming for a while, you should be able to talk to these. But if your background is in computer science and you have a computer science degree, well, you don't need to hear any of this. So the last interview I was in recently was mostly centered around taking ownership of like A/B testing practices, supporting the growth of a website, and trying to increase their viewership. Getting people to click on ads, basically. But obviously more than that. But mostly user behavior metrics through designing and conducting experiments, with a high degree of competency expected, with natural language processing desired. I found the job on a local board and was sent a code example, or a code exercise, the same day after I applied. And so I created an IPython notebook, made a histogram of the words, because that's what they asked for, used in words used in a sentence, and then I posted it on GitHub. I sent them a link. As a side note, when asked to produce a software problem via email, if it's just a PDF and they just say, hey, email this back, I think, as a Python guy and to other people that work with Python, I think it's in your advantage to use the IPython notebook and post it to GitHub, since they now support the rendering of the notebook format inline, and it captures the output of your local interpreter. So it's easy to read. It's easy for people that you send this to share. If you can think that, I send you, or maybe you send me a link, and I want to show other people on my team that are involved in the hiring process. It's really easy for them to just open it up, and it looks pretty good, so you can kind of capture a lot of performance metrics around what different approaches you may have taken, and the run times, and any kind of vector output for graphs that we might produce. But no, anyway. So, after sending in my word histogram, I got an invitation to a phone screen 4 weeks later. And sometimes it does take that long. So you never know when you're sending in your application when you might hear from someone. But don't fret. Usually if someone is interested, I find that they will reach out within a week. Usually within a week, maybe 2 at the most. But it's not uncommon to hear back much later. And we all have to work, and interviewing is a time sink for companies. So just as much as it is for those looking for work. Only half the time I was expected to talk about how to approach a data problem. Still pretty important, I think. I guess it really depends on the position and the job, the company. But an example being, we have data collected about when a user comments on a blog post and how often a user signs up for a mailing list, and maybe a few other things related to observations about user behavior on a website. And we want to figure out how to increase the number of signups or the viewership, or take your pick. How do we get more users, or how do we get more users to click on ads or something. So for a real problem, like real world problems like this, you might not have much experience with split or A/B testing, or really get a sense about what the expectations are from management. But under such a vague premise about data, you're really being asked to produce a general plan that describes how you might start a project or approach a product problem, or something related to, hopefully, something real world that the company has faced. But really it comes down to identifying stakeholders, asking questions about what's expected, question the level of granularity about what is being asked for, and how you might communicate what's possible or not. So some questions that I might ask, given such a broad set of questions about user behavior, or just how to approach a data problem. I might ask things like, in an interview, what is the typical lifespan of a user? How much data do we have about, how much data, or how much do we know about these users, and how granular is the data? Do we have time series? Is it events that are time stamped? And then I would ask about, or I would explain and speak about how I would sample the data, plotting histogram, maybe potential features like time of day, like number of unique posts, replies, time on the site, and then how I might design experiments with split testing. This could go really deep, but obviously you want to approach it with the level of detail and within the correct sequence. So you probably won't be designing a split test before you actually do some histograms, and you won't be collecting all this data until you really understand what is being asked for. So I think being able to talk about those things and what makes sense, how you validate those assumptions each step of the way. All this is hypothetical, but I hope you get the point. So you should expect to talk about a very vague data problem, how you might approach it, and hopefully ace it. And when it comes to stats in general, sadly I have only been asked about a p-score a few times, and a few things related to probabilities, and then maybe I've described some business around how the central limit theorem works once. I actually think that statistics, basic statistics, is pretty important, but it doesn't seem to have been very important during the interview process, I found. In summary, expect to be screened with a programming problem. Be able to talk about a project or two in as much granular detail as possible. Just pick anything you've done that you'd want to talk about in an interview, something that you're impressed by and that you would want to share with someone as if they were going to give you a job. And you don't have to be a super hacker, but at least 2/3 of interviews I've been in have asked really tough software engineering questions. Even for me, tough. Whether you're self-taught or not, review how data structures work and how to implement them. Go online, find some sites. Check my links here, and for what it's worth, I'd say up to an intermediate level, which I know is a very subjective kind of rating for something like that. But actually, all these sites rate their problems that you can solve, that they provide with some level of difficulty. So I'd say the ones that are labeled intermediate are pretty, I think, significant enough to say they're representative for good data structure questions you'd find in an interview. And think about ways you would approach a very vague data problem, because you'll get asked, how do you define the goals? How do you validate your work? How might you communicate your findings? Prepare for being able to talk about it in really granular terms, but don't be surprised when your interviewer only wants to go and talk in vague terms. So prepare for that. And if you can prepare yourself for these types of questions, you will be in good shape. My name is Dave Yarrington, and thanks for watching.